The Old Testament and weakness. Strictly speaking, this chapter is something of a digression, and to a lesser extent, so is the next chapter. After all, I am concerned with weakness in the New Covenant. Consequently, my main source must be the post-Pentecost scriptures. But as we know, every part of Scripture holds invaluable, indeed essential lessons for the believer. And that is why this chapter, and the next, are not pointless digressions. Throughout the Old Testament, a sense of weakness, smallness, inadequacy, feebleness was a recurring feature in the lives of the men and women God used for His glory. Time and again, smallness, weakness, fewness in numbers, lack of power is the very thing God looked for, and when He found it, He used it, He blessed it. Out of the many examples, let me give a few. Take Noah. God called Noah to do something he nor anyone else had any training for, any experience of. God told him to build an ark to preserve the human race and the animal kingdom through the horrendous judgment of the flood. Daunting isn't the word. Take Abraham. The life of Abraham was full of weakness, smallness, impossibility. You see it at every turn in his life. God called this man to quit the land and home of his upbringing, to become a wanderer, living in tents as a nomad in a foreign, virtually desert land, believing that he, a childless old-timer, would, by his wife, who herself was long since past childbearing, father a son. Indeed, that through that son, he would be the father of an immense number. The writer of Hebrews recorded the amazing story. By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith Sarah herself received power to conceive even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised, that is God. Therefore from one man, that is Abraham, and him as good as dead, were born descendants as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. Take Jacob, he who through his 12 sons was used by God to be instrumental in founding Israel. What a choice for God to make for such a major role in the history of redemption. A fearful, namby-pamby mother's boy, one out for the main chance, a cheat, a deceiver, a liar. I ask you, what weakness, what inadequacy. Likewise, the life of Joseph contains many examples of weakness, rejection, suffering, brokenness. Despised by his brothers, a disturbing puzzle to his father, he was sold as a slave, only to be falsely accused by his master's wife and flung into a dungeon. Yet he became the preserver of the nation, which would produce the Messiah. Think of Moses, who in fear of his life ran away from Egypt to spend 40 years, the best years of his life, marking time in a menial job in the desert, but who, when he was getting on in years, was called by God to go back to Egypt, tried to get out of obeying by making all sorts of excuses. Yet this same Moses, armed only with a stick, stood up to Pharaoh, confronted the power, majesty, tradition, and wisdom of Egypt, and so overcame everything that Egypt could throw at him. He led the children of Israel through the plagues into the Exodus, taking them dry-foot across a sea to witness the drowning of the cream of Egyptian forces. He was instrumental in providing water for an immense number and defeating Amalek. He received the law from God and brought a disobedient and troublesome nation through a howling wilderness for the best part of 40 years, leading them to the brink of Canaan. Pretty impressive for a man of 80 who lacked confidence in public speaking and it was armed with nothing but a stick. When Sisera, the commander of the Canaanite army, slipped through the hands of Barak with his 10,000 men, it was left to Jael, the wife of Heber, to deal with the foe, using nothing but a tent peg and a hammer. We know that Gideon had too many men, as God told him, "The people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel boast over me, saying, 'My own hand has saved me.'" Success came through smallness. God used Jonathan and his armor-bearer to cause havoc to the army of the Philistines, even in very difficult terrain. In fighting Goliath, David rejected Saul's armor, preferring his own shepherd's staff, his sling, and a few pebbles. I ask you. And so it goes on and on. Time would fail to list examples to make the point, which is, God puts a premium on weakness. Counterintuitive, would you say? Yes, indeed. As God said, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." And a signal difference between man's ways and God's way lies just here. Man thinks in terms of big. God thinks in terms of small. We want impressive numbers. God demands few. The Old Testament makes the point again and again.